generation, what do we think we can accomplish? And when the mayor announced the strike force back in June in Riggs Park, really talking about this issue of Black homeownership as a generational, multi-generational issue. And the idea that we might be able to accomplish some major goals and go well beyond, get us somewhere around 30,000 new households, 30,000 new Black homeowners in a generation, that would be an amazing shift. We've been having conversations to move us in that direction. So I just want to encourage us to think about what we can hold ourselves accountable to in half a generation and what we want to accomplish in a full generation. So appreciate the depth of commitment and curiosity and ideas around accountability and contributions that you all have been making. So thank you for that. And we've got a lot to dig into this week and next week. So stay with us. And thank you for what you've done thus far.
Thank you. Need a Reverend Hagler. If you're not,
thank you, Director.
If you're not safe, don't pay attention out there.
Oh, I'm always safe.
Okay.
Thank you much. Thank you, Director Kozar, for your words and for your encouragement. And I just want to thank everybody for their participation and how diligent people have been and how insightful has been the offerings have been. One of the things that hit me, though, is that we too quickly buy into the language of the industry and into the categories of the industry. When we're talking about a limited amount of money, we got to talk about efficiency. How do we make that money go further? How do we make that money address more people out there? And it's not a matter of getting the banks richer, but it's a matter of making the banks be more attentive, the lenders be more attentive to the need out here and the historical disparities that have existed within our community. And so in a sense, when we hear words like mortgage ready, it draws a real question in my mind that we're buying into somebody else's paradigm and not talking about real issues in our community. And so we got to really begin to sort of get free of the categorical language that has been presented and get into that place where we begin to create a new paradigm. Thanks for being a part of this.
Thank you, sir. So now, Josh, if you'll come and bring us to our process slides. Okay, so I'm going to walk through these pretty quickly, but it's really important that we hew, even in these later days, to what's allowed us to be as effective as we have been. The thing that I mostly want to point out, especially for the members of our public gallery, is the speaking courteously and respectfully to others and maintaining a zero tolerance for any comment, verbal or written, that's meant to attack or intimidate. We want to create an open and respectful process at all times. And when you get tired, sometimes your patience gets a little weak, but I hope we can continue to maintain the standard that we've had thus far. Next slide. We are going to operate following a consensus-based decision-making process, and I'm going to come to talk a little bit more about that because as we again come to the end, that's becoming more and more central to our work and our success. There are materials that we are disseminating based on our legislative requirements. And we want to make sure that we will confirm that folks have had a chance to review the summaries that have been sent out, see if there are any housekeeping issues that we need to deal with. Next slide. When we do get to the public meeting component, which is at the end of our today's 90-minute meeting, we always ask if those of you who want to be heard or make a contribution through the chat or the Q&A function, provide your name. It's optional, but we would like to have it in the record. We will have 15 minutes set aside, and we've been doing that at the end of every meeting for your comments or questions, and they do become part of the record. And we try to keep that window open, but we do continue to have our deliberations until someone lets us know that they have a comment or question. These meetings are being recorded, and the link to the recording is available to anyone in the public upon request. And that request can be sent to the person who sends their email out in the chat of this meeting. Next slide. So the agendas are, I'm sorry, next slide. So there is a summary that has been provided. And I want to see if, for those of you who had an opportunity to review it, see if you have any comments or changes to the summary. It will become part of the record of the Strike Force's efforts. So I want to just make sure that we're capturing as effectively as we can. We've been moving very fast, so I don't want to say that some mistakes haven't been made. Anyone? All right, thank you for that. We will consider the summary from July 28th to go on the record, to be in the record. And if possible, I'd like to have the slide that talks about consensus-based decision-making now. So while they're doing that, I want to remind everyone of what we have been doing from the very beginning, and that is preparing the strike force to deliver. There's actually a slide that explains what consensus-based decision-making is. That's the slide I'm looking for. It explains what it is that will make it possible to forward recommendations. What we have been moving towards, especially with all this documentation and presenting you with iterations of drafts, is to try and make sure that the entire strike force, every member, is satisfied that the recommendations that go forward adequately reflect the point of view that they can support. It doesn't mean that it's everything that they would want it to say, but it is sufficient, it is adequate, it is enough for them to support it. The importance, of course, being placed on everyone being able to say, we are forwarding as a strike force, as an entire strike force, these recommendations. As you know, these recommendations are going to be forwarded to DMPED, and the recommendations are going to be encapsulated in a report. And Anna, if you will, I would like for you to talk a little bit about that report, because I want to, again, remind the strike force of how all of this is coming together.
Good morning, everyone. It's good to see everyone again this week. So yes, we are but 2 weeks away from our last meeting. And so as we start working on the finalizing the recommendations, what's going to happen is that many of you know we've been working with the Urban Institute, who has been supporting us with the research and the data to make data-informed decisions. So they will be taking the recommendations and creating a final report. One of the things that we're also going to do is make sure that there is a legal review of all the recommendations to ensure we can actually implement the recommendations that have been offered. And so that's going to begin to take place in the next 2 weeks. And so we will, so you will hear more of that in the coming weeks. But excited to be at this point and appreciate all the hard work and commitment from each of the members to get us here.
Thank you very much, Anna. Are there any questions or comments at this point about that? Because I think it's really important that we now recognize that there's a bookend right in front of us. It's not very far away. So I want to make sure that everybody's understanding what home plate looks like. Okay, so I want to
I
just
have a question. I have a question. So,
yes, Ann.
and will we all be able to hear everyone's collaboration before these recommendations be made? You know, like from the finance, from housing supply, you know, the preservation. Will they all be collaborating? We all get to look at it before it's implemented.
Absolutely, that's a great
Okay.
question, and
Okay.
we have been grappling with the way to make sure we get both sufficient input from the working groups and give them each working group the time that it still needs. Some are at different stages of reaching consensus. Others are still working at that. So yes, we are looking probably as the run up to next week's Strike Force meeting, to be able to see if we can, which working groups will need to continue to meet and which working groups are perhaps ready with their draft recommendations. So yes, the short answer is yes. Thank you for asking it. So I want to walk us through this slide. You will recall it, and we're going to revisit it at the remaining meetings. Because I want to just make sure that we understand that this idea that no participant is 100% satisfied. Consensus-based decision-making processes produce solutions that are broadly acceptable. However, no participant is 100% satisfied. In this case, the recommendations can be endorsed and supported, and even, you know, defended as a representative of the body's decision. That doesn't mean that they're the result, you know, the favored result, but it makes it possible to say that the strike force was unified. It really represents a meeting of the minds. It also is intended to represent group or communicate group solidarity, that the entire strike force is agreed. And in this way, what it allows the mayor, the government, implementers, the folks who are going to need to make it actionable, these recommendations, whatever they finally are actionable, they will be able to move forward with the highest potential level of confidence. So I want to make sure that we are recognizing, and if there's some issues or questions or comments about this process, which we've been following, this is also a good time for us to revisit that. So is anyone who wants to say anything or has anything to say, or any questions or comments about how we have been operating and where we are aiming to head and land? Okay, all right, good. Thank you very much. So this is where we are going to look at where the conversation ended. And Evelyn, do we have a draft slide that will kick us off?
Yes, it's in the slide deck, Nina, if you want to pull that up.
Today, we're going to focus in on this question of the 2030 target. Okay, So we have been talking, I think now, at least for this will make the third or the fourth week. We've had a lot of data that we've received from urban and other agencies. I think that the question that I would say is where I'd like to start, but I'm going to open the floor, is that we have now, I think, my sense is that we have gone beyond break even as a floor. I think it would be fair to say that we have more or less set at least 10% as the floor. Well, that would mean 12,000 plus net new Black homeowner households. The question has been, how high do we want our ceiling to be? And so we've got two other markers, one at parity, and then there's one at 3 times 30. So I want to open the floor because there has been some discussion in working groups this week and among representatives of various government agencies that speak to what it is now we need to really zero in on as we talk about whatever the goal is that we set, what is the implication of having set that goal? And I know that there's some Strike Force members who have some interest in talking about that. And then I would like to make sure that we kind of open up the floor, because here's where it potentially matters. It may matter, depending on what we set as our target for 2030, what the best recommendations that the Strike Force is going to proffer. And it may matter that not only we think about the target for 2030, but then we talk about and think about what exists and what goes on after 2030. And the reason I'm pointing that out is because we should be, and I'm sure we are, very cognizant of the fact that this ambition that we've been undertaking is a history-making ambition, and we should recognize that it is an investment. It will require an investment, and that 2030 is not likely to be the endpoint for whatever success we're going to achieve. So I'm going to just say that as a way to begin to focus your attention, and I'm going to open the floor and see what you are now thinking. At the end of last week, we had begun to get a lot of comments around ambition, around getting closer to the 3 by 30 side of the equation. There is a lot that goes on into achieving that, however. And so I think now is the time for us to get very, very serious, very, very insightful about whatever goal we set. We've got to address the implementation that goes along and the implications that will be required to be successful. So the floor is open.
Well, I'll go first. I think whatever we want to accomplish, the money is going to be the object for us to reach where we is. So where the financing coming in, because the developers got their costs, and then it's going to take us costs to fill these households. So the money is going to be the plus to get us where we want to be. I still say we're at parity myself.
Thank you, Ann. Anita Kozart.
So I am very interested in Don, what you said about having both essentially a 2030 goal and a 2040 goal. And this is what I was kind of alluding to in my opening comments, is that the 2040 goal, articulating that, says that we're serious and that we know this is going to take this is going to take time, but that we're not, it pairs the commitment and ambition. And the 2030 goal becomes a proof of that ambition, a proof of that commitment. And if it makes sense to me to set a goal that is commensurate with that ambition and also achievable in the time frame that we're talking about. Again, it's really like 7 years. And we've had conversation about, 18 to 24 months needing to ramp ourselves up, get the right budget in alignment, as Ann was talking about, make sets of legislative changes or otherwise, and then start to make that progress towards that goal. So I would be interested, to be frank, I would be interested to see something around parity for a 2030 goal, and then that 30 by 30 goal as a 2040 goal. And I acknowledge that the initiative is 30 by 2030. And I also think that articulating it as a 2040 goal really reflects the thoughtfulness of the strike force and the realities that we've been grappling with the data and what we understand about our existing infrastructure and what we would need to build.
Catherine.
Sorry, couldn't get off mute. I'm actually interested in listening a little more, Dawn, before I make a comment, please.
Okay, Harrison.
When we talked about it a couple of weeks ago, I came of the mind of shoot for the stars, set the big goal, because if you come up short, you're still doing great. With the new information and this new conversation about, like Anita said, like looking out to maybe 2040 and beyond, my specific recommendation would be that we set a goal that is higher than parity, a round number of 20,000, and then say for the 2040 goal that number is actually like 30,000 or higher, and that we articulate both of those with what's going out so that there is a bigger and longer term target, and that if we do come up short of a 20,000 goal, then we're getting to parity. But I just don't agree with setting it at a number that we like to get to. I think you should always set the goal a little bit further than what you would be happy with. So 20,000 as the 2030, and then I'd throw out like 30,000 as a number for a 2040 goal, because hopefully there's new systems and things in place that can make that next level a little bit more achievable, or there's better infrastructure to do it. So that's my advice.
Thank you, Harrison. Christopher.
Don, I'm kind of thinking about the question a little bit differently and trying to work my way back from wherever it is we're going, particularly as we begin to hone and refine these goals, and thinking about how we get this work done, right? And what I mean to say by that is, in sitting in the finance conversation yesterday, how do we have an impact? And one of the things that I think is really important as we talk to one another is thinking about singles and doubles. So if every year we can get another 200 units out of HPAP, then that puts us at 1,500 units in the next 7 years, or 1,400 units in the next 7 years, right? So in each one of the working groups, as we begin to tease out kind of the real destinations, what are the incremental contributions of those actions? And to the point that I think you consistently made, how are we clearly defining what we're doing to get to that 20,000? Right? Because I think that's going to be the only way we're going to get there, is being very practical and deliberate and highly specific, and more than just the words, but the numbers now, right? So I can see where we want to go to the promised land, right? But we got to make the numbers work. We got to know how much it's going to cost, and we got to know how much each piece of this puzzle is going to contribute to the end.
Christopher, I'm going to press on you just a little bit because I know that I can. What would be, I mean, this is gonna, this is where we live now. What would be, in the light of what you just said, a recommendation that you could support?
You mean for the end in total?
Yes, sir. So
I would start with the parity, right? Because I can see, as we talk and not thinking really hard without the benefit of the brilliance on this phone, 10 to 20% of that not working very hard, right? There's gonna be a revolutionary element, right, which is gonna get us the last, call it 20 to 25% there. And then in the middle is where we got to do that work, right? And that work is, talking to people like Harrison, how many more people can we pull through? And what are the things that you need from us to increase Black home ownership by 200 to 500 homeowners a year, right? We don't have any bankers on the line, but Ellis has a big pot of money, right? So talking to Ellis and saying, Ellis, how are we gonna get 5,000 units over there with what you're doing? Is going to Drew and saying, look, you got this new HPAP amount. How are we gonna divide up this bucket, right? And how many people is it gonna touch? And what are the price points of the homes that we're gonna get people into? It's going to people like Harvey and saying, Harvey, I need you to triple your production so that you're producing, call it 50 to 60 units every year for the next 7 years. And then we bring all those pieces together to add it up to figure out where we are. But we're gonna have to be very specific and very focused with giving people exact tasks, right? And pathways to get where we wanna go. Instead of, it's gonna be important to have these big picture goals, right? But then we have to get into the weeds and define each piece that's gonna get us to that larger thing.
Thank you very much. Much appreciated. All right, the floor is open. This is the day we need to really hear from everyone the best thinking about this that we can get. Babatunde.
I just wanted to say I agree with what Chris just discussed. I think that is really going to give backbone to the goal, but I'm still a proponent of parity as the floor and 3 by 30 as the ceiling. I think that it's good to have a long-term view, which is the 2040 perspective, but I don't want people to lose sight of 2030. And I think it may cause some confusion. So I think keeping the focus a little more narrow, that's why what Chris said is very important, because it is a contracted timeline. And I think having those individual components and see how those numbers add up to the goals really gives us a realistic roadmap of what is possible.
Babatunde, let me press you a little bit. I want to make sure that if you saw a draft recommendation that we set the parity number as the 2030 goal and the 3 by 30 number as the 2040 goal, would you be able to support that? And you're not on the record to say yes or no. We're not. I'm asking a theoretical question.
I would, but the caveat would be, going back to Chris's point, what do the numbers support?
Yes, sir. All right. Thank you. Sheila Cross-Reed.
Looking at the numbers, I guess to me, I'm wondering, when we used the 2019 white ownership rate in the district as a base, as opposed to 2020 or 2021, given the fact that we've seen a lot of increase in the white ownership rate over the last few years. So using 2019 as a base year, to me, kind of throws the numbers off in the paradigm. So to me, I would think that you want to be, if you're going to be making projection, they should be based upon more realistic more realistic basis for which you're going to be able to project.
And Sheila, if we were to do that, and these questions about using 2019 have been raised before. So let's say that we would agree. Let's say that we would agree that it needs to either be 2020 or 2021. Is the parity number for you, whatever that ends up being, the place that you would be able to support as a target for 2030?
A good question. I think then that rather than parity, we should definitely be trying to reach a higher goal, because if we're going to just do parity, then basically it's not going to be as effective as if we were to try to strive for something that's going to be higher than what the conditions are for a given year. That makes sense.
It makes sense.
it's higher than parity. Just suffice it to say higher than just parity.
All right, so I'm just going to call that parity plus.
Yes.
Okay, thank you very much. Sasha.
Okay, so interesting dialogue. Just to ground the conversation a little bit, you know, if you think about how far $10 million is going to get us on the supply side, it may take, let's say, that it costs $100,000 in gap financing to create units. So we're really talking about 100 units that's what $10 million will really get us, right? So we're obviously going to need to leverage additional financing to get to a much bigger number. And I'm throwing that out again to just ground the conversation around implementation and costs. So I think that, you know, 19,000 by 2030 is highly aspirational when you think about what it's going to take to, you know, to get to, you know, net new Black homeowners by 2030. I also buy into the idea of continuing this effort in the long term, and that 30,000 by 2040 is an aspirational goal that I would support.
Thank you very much, Sasha. Susan?
Well, I would be very interested to hear what the real estate agents on this panel say, but I'm very concerned about the loss. We're not going to get anywhere if we don't stem the loss. And I was thinking a lot about what the composition of the loss is. And I looked at some of the statistics in Prince George's County, which has a very high Black homeownership rate. And in my immediate vineyard that I toil in, when a homeowner needs more space than the home we built for them, very often they want a larger home and they go to Prince George's County. This is just anecdotally, but we've got to, the other thing that's happened is they've become more financially secure. They're in the missing middle. And I'm concerned that the loss, the hemorrhage at the bottom here is really part of the missing middle. We're losing the middle income Black homeowners. And there's nowhere on this chart that says that we're going to reach a Black homeownership rate solely with lower median family income families. We've got to think about how we attract that missing middle back and how we keep the people who are becoming more prosperous, keep them in the city. So what I'm worried about is we're never going to reach these numbers if we just focus on lower median family incomes. This is the vineyard I toil in, but I'm worried there's another piece of this that we haven't addressed.
Thank you very much, Susan. Let me just stop here and see if anyone wants to respond. And Drew, I'm kind of looking at you.
I agree with that 100%. And I think we had some conversation on this early on. This just can't be about just affordable homeownership opportunities. We don't look, you know, across the spectrum for enhancing what we have for, you know, low and moderate income folks to become homeowners, then also looking at, you know, that missing middle as we've talked about. And, you know, we're not having a holistic look at, you know, the impact we could have. So I agree 100% that if we aren't looking at, number one, shoring up, making more efficient and making more robust the current affordable offerings, but then also adding those above the line programs that, folks who otherwise because of income wouldn't have the opportunity for some sort of help or assistance. We haven't gone far enough. And I think to add a bit to color that a bit, I've seen this in past work when you look at folks skilling up through our workforce system, looking specifically at folks in the construction industry when it comes to apprenticeship. You start at a certain level, but as you skill up and earn more, we started to see a lot of those folks as they got into their career after their initial training, move out of DC to go look at that purchase. And I think Susan is right. A lot of the times people start looking across the border in PG. I'm sorry, I think that's pejorative to folks that live over there. It's a leadership, Prince George's County.
Right.
But as someone reminded me that came about because there's a Prince George County in the area too. So the delineation, the people started saying PG. But anyway, I think we do need to put some thought into those middle income to where programs don't currently exist to help folks in that area, to both stem the tide and create new opportunities to really get to this number. Going back to the overall conversation, I'm still at parity as a goal. Parity plus, if you want to call it that, 20,000 net new, and to the point, accounting for and reversing that negative loss to get to 20,000 new would be huge. It is aspirational. It's going to be hard to do. We're going to have to be very deliberate about how we get there, but that is a huge number to try to get to. But to make something as a round number as parity plus, I think is going to have to where I would sit for the initial goal for 2030 and look at a larger goal for 2040.
Can I ask one question? What's the income for the middle y'all keep talking about? What's the middle income that you're talking about when you say middle?
Depending on source, if we're looking at our current programs, when we look at federal funding, we're probably looking at 80% and below. So somewhere probably between 80 and 120% of area median income. And those folks are working class folks. You're talking about two working individuals that still may not be able to have the buying power to be in this market.
Okay, thank you.
So Catherine, just hold on for a little bit longer. Drew, let me press you a little bit just so we get the math straight, because you talked about parity plus, and okay, parity plus, does that translate into 18,000 or 19,000, depending on whether we go with 2019, 20, or 21? Is it that number? Is it the parity number plus 5,000?
I like Harrison's thought. Maybe let's set it around number of 20,000.
Okay, all right. Catherine.
Thank you, Don. I appreciate very much all the folks that have talked before, because it helped me get to what I'm about to say. And it's not necessarily different than what we talked about before, but I think especially Chris, thank you for your thoughts, because that helped me get to what I want to say. All right, so when I had a week or two ago, I had said like 23,000 because I just did some easy math between the 3 by 30 and the parity. I am more than willing to and happy to support Harrison's 20,000 round goal. In terms of Don, I know you're asking for this consensus thing. So using the 20,000, I went back to my math, and 20,000 units over 7 years net new comes to 2857 a year. I don't know enough about math. That's why I went to law school, but I don't know enough about math to know if it changes, as you go down the years. But if we just look at those basic numbers, we already had data that showed us that 1,400 net new units are on average, this is for Black homeowners, on average are bought every year. Already happen every year, which then would leave 1,457, which basically means we would have to double what is currently happening. So then if I go back to Chris's comments, when you have those conversations with Drew and with Harvey, you know, I think once we know what that number is, we then know how, like, we can't just talk to Harvey about tripling his production. We have to talk to 2 or 3 developers or 4 developers. And do you know, like, do you see where I'm going with this? So that if you go backwards in terms of what's our goal, and then know what the number we're trying to hit, it then allows us to have those conversations with the people who actually have to produce this stuff, produce the housing, stretch HPAP, you know, et cetera, et cetera. When I bought my first house in DC, I was an agency director. I didn't obviously qualify for HPAP, but I did get EHAP. EHAP is a tremendous tool for folks who don't necessarily fall in that, you know, in the low, moderate, or whatever income. So my point to that is, as we've talked about the marketing aspects, you know, that, you know, we've talked about it. I think it's somewhere in our goals, but I think it, again, to Drew's points, we and Susan, about hitting those middle line folks, I think it's really important that we not overlook the power of EHAP. And then somebody wrote, I think Harrison, you wrote something in the chat about the loan products that are available through the lenders. Again, all of that goes to that middle group that we're trying to preserve, or that don't necessarily fall into the affordable housing. So I had a lot of thoughts there, but I'm very excited about us agreeing on a number. And if it's 20 grand, I'm happy to support that. Parity plus, Don, I thought that was cool. That we do parity plus, get, you know, hone in on a number and then work backwards to how do we actually literally increase to get that additional 1457 a year. Okay, I'll be quiet. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Catherine. Sheila, I see your hand, but I am going to ask you to hold for a minute. I want to hear from the Strike Force members who have not spoken yet. Amber, we did see that you supported Harrison. Ellis, we see that you supported I'm going to call it the Harrison recommendation. Others? All right, so y'all gonna make me call you, Reverend Bowen.
Yes, before I add my comments, could you repeat the Harrison recommendation?
Harrison, please repeat your recommendation.
20,000, just above parity for 2030, but then having the other part of it was for the 2040 goal to say 30,000 for 2040. So there's 2 bigger numbers that are articulated, and there's a cushion between what we shoot for and what we would be happy with internally.
Thank you. Let me begin by saying that I was pleased when Chair Cozart mentioned having 2 goals, 2030, 2040. And I've always agreed with Harrison that we should aim big. I think we utilize some of the same quote along those lines. What we're trying to do, what we're tasked to do, is to stop the bleed. But at some point, we have to deal with bleeding in and of itself. Having said that, I'm for the Harrison amendment, because I believe also that parity is a starting line. And I also know that the number is not today what it was a week ago. So these continue to be a widening of the gap. So yes, I'd be for that slightly higher 2030 goal around parity, and then a separate goal for 2040.
Thank you very much. Joanne.
Let's see, I'll keep my thoughts a little bit brief because I'm quite in it for a reason. I'm not sure this is at the very core of my expertise, but I also, the kind of emerging comments I'm hearing around Harrison's idea, parity plus with a future goal, and Director Cozart's idea, it's not many folks' idea. I agree with that. I really like making sure our recommendations support that. I guess the lawyer in me will say, you know, we sort of, when you're negotiating a deal, there's no deal until all the pieces of the deal are together. So while I think it's important to get forward on this conversation about the goal, but I think as a strike force, you know, if we get there, but then as we work out our recommendations, we think, oh, we can support more than this, or we can't support this, this is not something we should, these two kind of move together as the conversation goes.
Thank you. Reverend Hagler.
I knew you were gonna come to me sooner or later.
Oh, yes, sir.
The numbers leave me cold. I don't weigh in on these numbers at all, simply because I don't think that we've built the vehicle to reach any of these numbers. We've talked around about a lot of different programs and a lot of scenarios, but we really don't have a package together that can clearly say that we can drive towards any numbers whatsoever. So I'm just going to pass on that and say that, because, it's just like, again, it's as we talked about it the whole time, people don't know what programs are available. There is no centralized, there is a centralized place, but, you're dealing with also people who are at various levels in terms of internet access. So you can't say that because we have an internet that people have access, or because we got people out there who know bits and pieces of a program that folks have access. So I'm not sure how we can drive the engine towards any numbers as long as this is sort of laying out there in a very divergent way. And we haven't really talked about how we create the engine and how we consolidate the engine so that people know what is actually available, so that it really informs the numbers. That's just my opinion.
Well, thank you very much for putting it out there, because I think as a procedural recommendation, having this conversation in theory about a potential agreement around a number makes it then possible to reverse engineer and focus on what are the recommendations that are going to answer the question, the very important question you just raised, which is what is the program to achieve whatever that number is. So the question is, how do we drive the car? Do we drive the car by coming up with the program first, or do we drive the car by making sure we agree on where we want to end up? So where we are is that we've heard now, you've been right here while I've been here, and there is a consensus emerging. We're at parity, and we're at parity plus. So there is a narrowing that has begun to occur. And Reverend Hagler, while I know that we will eventually hear from you, I also want to thank you, because we do have to make sure that whatever we recommended forward, we can't just have a 2030 goal and then not have a program to achieve it. That's where the actionable and implementable comes in. And I think that is really so important now, that we see ourselves creating that unity between those two ends. So I'm gonna say, fine, for now, this is helpful, and we will come back around as we further test what are the other recommendations that we're gonna need to now have in place. I want to just see if I think there was one other person that I didn't know that we heard from. Harvey.
I think we should start high and work backwards, and changing some of the systems is imperative, because I think a lot of the data and a lot of the systems were created back in like the 80s. And the missing middle, from what Susanna said, is key, because we are losing a lot of that missing middle of income, which goes back to what I was saying a few weeks ago, where you have your teachers, EMIS, police officers, and your retail workers that are fleeing the city because they can't afford to live in the city. And having something that keeps them here is imperative to the Black home ownership. If you look at Prince George's County, who's moving to Prince George's County is the question.
All right, sir. I don't know, is Sheila Alexander Reed still on the call?
Yes, I'm here.
All right, Sheila, you're up.
Well, I put my notes in the chat. I have a backache, so I've got a heating pad on, so I'm trying to listen while in pain, but I was just say that I like the Parity Plus idea. I like the fact that, you know, we're at the point where we can't just put out numbers. We have to really do the work to get to those numbers and make sure that these numbers are attainable. I also like the fact that I think it was Suzanne pointed out, Suzanne Rice Slater pointed out the fact that let's not miss the fact that we have to stop, you know, the bleeding that's occurring as well. So I just support what people have said so far, and appreciate the conversation that we're now getting down to the nitty gritty, which is really where the work has to be done.
Amen. And Sheila, go ahead and get back on that heating pad and get
Thank you.
evidence. Thank you so much.
I don't want to look injured, but I am.
Okay. All right.
All
Get
right.
better.
Thank you.
All right. Sheila Cross-Reed, I see a hand still up.
Yeah, you know, I raised my hand on because as the conversation was ongoing, I noticed that some people were referring to new Black home owners and some referring to new Black homes, basically for new homes being built, developed. So I think it should be clarified as to homes that origin. Is it going to be the numbers representing a new development of new homes, or the existing people who are buying existing homes? So I think that clarification needs to be made. That's what's why I had my hand up.
Thank you, Sheila. Now, I've been trying to mount it to the chat while I listen to everyone, as I see Drew has begun in putting some, I think, interesting and maybe even important numbers in the chat. And I also see Christopher weighing in. I want both of you to elevate and bring that into the front of the strike force. Drew, let's start with you.
Yeah, I'm sorry, we just kind of started having this in the chat, but definitely it is worth mentioning as we start looking at, to Reverend Hagler's point, how do we build the vehicle to drive towards this goal? It's policy, it's programs, and it's resources. And the question was raised, I think Harrison threw the number out there, and it's a number I've been thinking about, that if we're looking towards this, and this is just kind of back of the envelope math, and we'll refine it as we go, we're really talking about somewhere around about $100 million a year if we're serious about trying to get to this goal. And is that a realistic ask budgetarily? And the point I made was, going back to the beginning of Mayor Bowser's term in office, it wasn't realistic when she promised that she would put at least $100 million. I mean, it wasn't realistic when she pledged to put at least $100 million every year into the Housing Production Trust Fund. She's done that plus more for the first 6 years of her term. And this current year and the year coming up, she's quadrupled that. We have $400 million in this year and $440 million for next year. So that will, and the fact that we're sitting here impaneled by this mayor, showing that this is one of her top priorities, I think asking for what we need is realistic, and it's something we should do.
Christopher?
I was simply saying that we oftentimes couple two issues together, and that's the net outflow versus the net new. And I think they're two very different conversations, right? One is about keeping folks in the district, and one is about creating new homeowners, right? And I think that there would be a different discussion, strike force, et cetera, about retaining folks in the district. As we talk about this goal of 20,000, we're talking about net new, and the resources we're putting there are one thing. There are any myriad of issues about Black folk who are leaving the district, right? And so the question becomes, if we're about creating these homeowners, then there's going to be optionality after they become homeowners, and they may not stay forever, right? And is that a bad thing? Is that a good thing? I think that's a conversation for another day. But I do think we want to focus in on our conversation around those 20,000 being created.
Thank you, sir. Anita Cozart.
So I wanted to say a couple things about this number, and I think Harrison said, does that make sense to even ask for? And Drew talked about the commitment of this mayor. I think the other piece for us to think about is what's the commitment of philanthropy and banks and other entities that have stated that they care about this issue. And so I think that connects to our ambitious goals that we set, and goals that look at issues both of what Christopher was just talking about, both of providing that security for Black homeowners who want to stay in the district but are experiencing challenges, and would-be Black homeowners that are experiencing challenges as well. And I think that is something that can really capture the imagination and be a good kind of coupling of strong investment from our mayor in this issue, coupled with strong investment from non-government sectors as well. Additional strong investment, obviously, folks who are in the strike force and others who are not on the strike force have been making that, chipping away at that, or working to chip away at that. But I think this new concerted effort could attract some resources in addition to making a good case inside government.
All right. Obviously, I want to talk about a few more things before we get to Tim's update on community engagement, stakeholder engagement. But Catherine, I see your hand up.
Thanks. I'll make it this one quick. So I keep coming back to this idea of leveraging dollars. And Anita, when you just talked about all the other potentials, like the lenders or the philanthropists or whomever that operate, that it sort of needs to be all. I'd like to just throw out as a big, bold sort of recommendation that what if one of our recommendations is that we ask all the lenders who are that operate in the district to, where's Karima? Is she on this call? Anyway, to put together a fund that backs homeowner loans, right? Like, let them do a private fund. Money doesn't have to go out of it, but they all contribute so many million or prorated by the size of the lenders. But then that, in addition, backs loans I'm trying to solve for one of our issues around folks getting loans. If they've got if the lender has a stopgap, has a fund that says if this lender goes under, if this borrower goes under, we're going to be able to get some of our money back. I think that's going to go a long way to, but they have to put the money up, so that's money added, not money taking away from what we already have in our programs. So anyway, just again, a thought.
Thank you, Joanne.
I was just going to second Catherine's thought. I like that. And it's my recommendation. It might be worth revisiting. I think many of the big sort of banks and lenders made fairly large pledges in the wake of the George Floyd uprisings in 2020. There were big numbers thrown about of money that was going to be pledged to racial equity, and whether that money has been delivered or whether this might be a way to kind of harken back to that and say, let's here's where you can put some of that money.
All right, I'm going to call on Harrison and Graylan, but I am now going to ask to hear from, in their role as members of the strike force, Tim and Anna.
So who first on? I'm sorry.
Tim.
Got it. Well, thank you, Don. I would say that, I appreciate where the conversation's gone as Drew and Chris, folks on our side, that we have a different role in implementation. I think where the conversation has shifted to talking public-private partnership, what Drew mentioned in the mayor's commitment to the Housing Projections Trust Fund, and showing that it's possible to invest in the same way for home ownership, that we should think about that, but also think about some of the other previous strike forces where we've created funds that have that matching component to figure out how to make this fund work. And so that, in combination of what Drew has talked about with $100 million a year being a potential target, if we combine that and assume that $100 million is matched, to some degree to 1 to 5, 1 to 10, whatever makes sense as we talk more to the industry, I think that helps us from the perspective of from the financials. But I also want to make sure we circle back to what Reverend Hagler and what Director Donald also mentioned, making reference to as we talk with these working groups and these recommendations, really thinking about if we come up with a plan to solve the $2 billion problem, what are the action steps to where how that money can be effectively implemented to get to the $100K per unit subsidy that Sasha mentioned, right? So how do we make sure that we have an effective plan, even though we may not necessarily, how do we have an effective plan that align with the money that we've talked about? And so I like where the conversation is going, but that's just my thoughts.
Thank you, Tim.
So I too appreciate sort of the thoughtfulness and kind of taking a step back from kind of aspirational goal to more to looking at ways to ensuring we can reach the goals that are set forth by the strike force. I keep going back to a comment, I think it was Harrison, who said, it will take Harvey or maybe it was Chris, it will take Harvey tripling the work that he does. And I actually think it means tripling the work that we all do, because, and so I really want to make sure we're all saying the same thing, because every part of this continuum is going to triple, will need to triple the amount of work to get to this number. From the amount of work realtors are doing with the local community, you're going to have to triple your work to get to that goal. The lenders involved are going to have to triple their work. The district will have to triple its work. And we're using tripling, as sort of a placeholder, but all of us will have to do a great deal more. And so I'm glad that we're talking about it in that level of specificity, so we can together celebrate in 10 years the goals that were achieved. So.
Thank you, Anna. So let me, again, Reverend Hagler, Harrison, just hold for a minute. We have had even today, most recently from Sheila Cross-Reed, a focus on this 2019 versus 2020 versus 2021. I want to see what appetite there is. And let's just say that I am going to say that we would say that we want to do 2021. Would there be any opposition, any difficulty if we were to say, okay, it could be that we replace the 2019 white home ownership rate with the 2021 home ownership rate? I'm wanting to see what the range is that we can actually see if we can't close it. So is there anything that is going to be like a non-starter for anyone here? Is 2021 a non-starter? Suzanne?
There's one issue in the parity sentence that I think is important. We're looking at 18,000, almost 19,000 net new Black homeownership households, and we're comparing it to the white homeownership rate, not the net new white homeowners. So we're making it extremely difficult. We're saying net new and comparing it to an existing rate. So the question is, do we want a homeownership rate, a Black homeownership rate, compared to a white homeownership rate? Or if we're going to do net new, we got to do net new white. We're making it very difficult on ourselves.
Suzanne, that's a good call. That's a good call out. Drew?
No, I agree. I think using a number, I think 2019 to me is fine. to come up with a static number that we are trying to get to. I don't think we should get caught up on percentages and final rates. I think impact on 20,000 potential net new Black homeowners is what we need to focus on, as opposed to, did we absolutely to the percentage achieve parity? I think we use it as a baseline where we know to a certain degree of what that number was at a certain point in time, and base our activities into the next 7 years on that, and try to get and exceed that to the best we can.
All right. I want everyone to think about that. It may be something that is not a big deal, given everything else we've talked about today, but I'm not going to let it hang out there. We are now, as Sheila Alexander said, we're getting into the nitty gritty, and words matter, numbers matter. Reverend Hagler, you first, Harrison next, and we're going to close it out then and give it over to Tim to update us on community engagement.
Yeah, I believe I want to say something in terms of really sort of trying to drive this engine to figure out how we get anywhere towards any numbers. One is, it seemed like I heard that majority of HPAP folks were single, were women, single women, single women head of household. And if that's the case, that becomes a constituency that we need to serve. A lot of people are going to Prince George's County, as most of us know, because they say they can buy more house for their families. And when you look around in DC, there's not a whole lot of construction that's taking place for families that is affordable. So that's one of the issues that is upon us, because the thing is that if you're going to raise your children, you are looking for a place where you can raise your children. You're not looking for concrete, and you're not looking to necessarily be living on top of somebody else. That's one of the realities that we're facing with in the District of Columbia. Number two is that we need to really begin to concentrate on how we move people from housing vouchers, using those vouchers to become homeowners. And if we're going to talk about driving the engine, becoming efficient with money, particularly efficient with government money, we got to really push the lenders towards zero down and no closing. And it doesn't mean you're going to finance it into the loan. No closing costs, no fees whatsoever. They got to come with preferential rates to DC. That's what we got to look at in terms of maximizing that money. Is that out there? Yes, it is out there, because we've been doing it for 36 years. And the fact is that we are exempt for private mortgage insurance. So your money goes further. Basically, we self-insure. And so that's the reality that we need to sort of address. How do we make whatever pot of money go further? And how do we address the greatest need within our city right now in terms of really equipping heads of households, particularly women who are single, raising children, and particularly take those who are searching, who have housing vouchers, and how do we use those housing vouchers to move them into purchase? That's how we begin to create a different shift and a different model in terms of bringing people into home ownership.
All right, listen, I'm going to ask Harrison, Babatunde, and Drew to hold their questions. We need to hear from Tim. We need to open up the public comment period. And if there are people in the public and we're now up to 57, I think that's the highest number we've had. We ought to be very thankful for that kind of participation and interest. And I do thank the folks who are listening. We'll come back depending on what kind of questions or comments get raised during that public comment period. But Tim, we're going to go back over to you now.
Thank you, Don. So just a quick update on what's going on before I jump into what's on the slide here. We've had some conversations with some different stakeholder groups, the last of which was the appraisers. And so with the information that the Strike Force members that you all will be sending in by COB today, to Don, we'll be sending in some information from the appraisers as well. So we've had some really good conversations and feedback, but they've echoed a lot of what we've heard throughout some of the conversations. Regarding community engagement, the survey, we've been pushing that out. We'll at the event that we'll be talking about here in a second on Tuesday, we've had over 1,000 responses to the survey, and so we're putting that into a format that can be digestible for the strike force members to hear, as well as we'll be reporting out that as a part of the town hall, virtual town hall that will be taking place on this coming Tuesday at 4 p.m. Obviously, we ask all of the strike force members to attend this, especially the ones that we've asked to participate in the panels. But folks will go to the link there, and that'll be how you can participate in the town hall. We'll have conversations really focused around how do we get more new homeowners, Black homeowners in the District of Columbia. And so we look forward to residents chiming in as a part of that conversation. Please distribute that. There will be links on social media that you'll be seeing here momentarily if they aren't already up now.
Okay, Tim, thank you very much. Any questions or comments for Tim? All right, great. All right, now let's go to our public comment period. If someone will put up the slide deck, the slide for how we do our public comment. What we're going to open for those of you who are listening in and have been patiently listening in. I want to thank you, first of all, for that. Next slide, please. I think what we want to do is remind you. I want to see the slide that reminds folks of the rules of our public comment. I'd like to still see that slide, please. We're gonna seek any comment from our public audience. If at any point in the next 15 minutes or so you would like to weigh in, you have an opportunity to do that. We'd love for you to share your name with us. We'd love for you to go on the record, which means that this meeting is being recorded. And if you put something in the Q&A function or something in the chat, we will appreciate it, but it will also become part of the record. We know that many of you are listening as folks who want to benefit from the deliberations of this strike forces. So we want to thank you for patiently listening. We've had about this 50+ number since the very beginning of the meeting. So we really do thank you. It takes a lot just to hang in and listen and stay connected. I am hearing that we do not have anyone that we have a question or comment from the public. So I'm going to go back, and if any time someone does pop up, we will recognize them. Let's go back to Harrison, and then Babatunde, and then it will be Drew.
Gotcha, I'll be quick. I just wanted to comment Anna's and Anita's comment earlier of the strike force as kind of a galvanizing target that others can attach to and come on to. I can speak specifically for our local, state, and national Realtor Association. Our 2024 incoming president is actually has one of our NAR's chief fair housing policy leader on that 3 for 30 committee. So there will be both financial, marketing, and communication goals connected to the national 3 for 30 campaign in the 2024 leadership year for Tracy Casper. And I'm one of her leaders in her committee section. So just know that as we do our thing, the leveraging of other local, state, national Realtor Association groups is something I want to be happy to help with and keep going. So that's why a big target is good, because the other folks can attach to it and see where they can help contribute. So
thank you, Harrison. I'm going to interject Ayanna. She's on the phone because she's got connectivity problems. Ayanna, go ahead. Okay, maybe not. Babatunde.
I'm going to be real quick. I agree with we need to change the language underneath the parity statement. It should read the number so that we know what it is. You shouldn't compare rate with a number. It gets confusing. But we should still keep that number, but instead of using rate in that defining sentence, use the number.
Right, thank you very much, Babatunde. Drew?
Don is Drew. Oh, I'm sorry, I'll go after, I'm back. I'll go after Drew.
Go ahead, Ann.
Oh, okay. So I'm coming from the standpoint of being a realtor and a kind of smaller developer. I'm nowhere near Harvey, but I see that a lot of the onus is being put on the likes of people like Harvey who can deliver, you know, multi-units and things like that. But I have a couple of properties in DC that sit on quite a bit of land that could, you know, if developers were incentivized, that they could perhaps, you know, kind of fast track the process, because I know with permitting, it takes so long to get a project off the ground, and it's sometimes prohibitive for the small time developers. So I'm just wondering if we can appeal to DCRA and the likes to kind of fast track some of these projects that could alleviate the supply chain. So that's one thought. And another thought, I think I lost my second thought, but that was my main point. Just kind of, you know, remove the obstacles and the timing, because timing means money, and we just don't have a lot to be sitting on a project for 1 or 2 years. Oh, my second thought was, I actually have a property in Deanwood that we just purchased, and I would love to just go into HPAP and say, I'm setting aside this process for HPAP. I don't know if that's something that, you know, fair housing wise can be done or what have you, or if anybody has ever, you know, gone that route with HPAP for a set aside, but I would totally be willing to set this property aside. And I know it's only one out of thousands that we need, but, you know, if we can get more developers incentivized to say there's a program where we're trying to, you know, backfill the supply, you know, how can we work with HPAP to do that?
Thank you very much, Ayana. We do have some comment from our public gallery. I'm going to read them, and I want to start by thanking each of you. Roger Gordon writes, if our goal is to help Black families lift themselves up by achieving and maintaining Black home ownership, then we need to make sure their wealth stays in the family. In the district, we estimate that there are 2,600 single Black seniors in their 80s or 90s who own homes that are collectively worth $1.25 billion. And then he goes on to advertise his company and talks about the work that they can do to help, and provides a web address. Roger Gordon, thank you for that. That will be published in our record. Gregory Billings. Apologies for being late. I'm Gregory Billings. I'm a single male first-time home buyer who is looking to buy a home in DC or Oxon Hill, Prince George's County. Well, we want you to stay in the District of Columbia, Gregory. So you want to know if there are any programs targeted at you? Yes. And I'm going to ask one of my JSA colleagues to direct you to, remind me of the name of it, Anna, for Open Door?
Front Door.
Front Door. Front Door. Give them the address, JSA of Front Door. And Melissa Millar. As the strike force continues to think through policies, programs, and funding mechanisms, just want you all to continue to consider limited equity co-ops and TOPA and dedicated funding for first right to purchase programs. Thank you, Melissa. That will also go into the record. Anthony Lorenzo Green. How does the task force plan to tackle the issue of reverse mortgages and how devastating they have been for Black families in DC? How will you assist seniors in reverse mortgages, keep their homes in the families? Many didn't understand what they were signing up for years ago. You're absolutely right, Anthony. We will share many of the conversations, and the records reflect that we have addressed these issues. We have an entire working group that has been looking at housing preservation, housing security. So you can be assured that this is something that the task force has tackled, and it will be reflected in the recommendations and report. I want to thank all four of you, and I want to say that we still have a few minutes, 4 minutes exactly, 3 minutes in which you can still make a comment. Let me now come back around I probably lost track, but I see Joanne's hand. I know that there was Drew's hand was up previously. Drew, let me know if you still have something to say, but Joanne, you're on.
And Director Cozart was ahead of me as well. I'll defer to her if she still wants to speak, please.
So I just wanted to say that I was really impressed that we've had 1,000 folks respond to the survey, and appreciate efforts of those on this call and otherwise to get that word out. And I'm eagerly anticipating hearing what people have to say, and interested in how we can integrate that quickly into what we're thinking about in terms of recommendations and the goal.
Okay, Joanne.
I really appreciate the conversation today. I sort of wanted to just flag the issue of repairs because I think it lurks in the background of a lot of these different issues, driving folks to sell if they can't figure out a way to repair, certainly driving folks into reverse mortgages. And as the public comment just noted, that really, you know, at the end of the day, eats up all the equity in the home. And I think it also has an effect on the types of homes that are coming onto the market. So the homes becoming available and maybe why they end up with investor flips instead of, because it's, you know, if the home is in fairly serious disrepair, that's quite daunting for a new homeowner to take that challenge on. And so, you know, harking back to, I think Director Donald mentioned that some of our ideas will have to be revolutionary. I think this is an area where we might be, I know the single family rehab program exists, but I think we really need to think a lot bigger, both in helping people maintain the existing stock, which will have a follow on of keeping homes available, and whether some of that work could be done by, you know, nonprofit entities that maybe really, rather than have, you know, a grant that is a one-off to a contractor and all that's hard to manage that, we put some money into some entities that really in a larger scale way make these repairs that are, you know, with the older housing stock in the district, a serious issue.
Thank you, Joanne. All right. We have a few more minutes left. Did we get anyone else from the public?
We have not, Don.
All right. Thank you, Josh. All right. Well, I think I would say that this is now exactly where we want to be. We have gotten into, we will quote Sheila Alexander Reid, that this is the nitty gritty and we are in it. I believe, and if someone thinks differently, it would be great to hear it, but I believe that a consensus has begun to emerge around parity or parity plus, and we still have to put a little bit more precision to what exactly that looks like. We still may need to pay some close attention to what are we talking about, impact number or rate, what you know, what's the comparison, what's the equation. But I think we have now begun to zero in a way that is our work. We're going to publish in forward a recommendation that is something that people can say, okay, we hear you, we're clear. Now we'll try and figure out how to implement it. And we've had a lot of conversation today about that. So let me just compliment everyone, because now it's, you know, we can all be real theoretical and hypothetical and we can show how smart we are, but at the end of the day, we've got to zero in on something that we can forward. So I want to thank everyone. And in doing that, I'm going to turn it over to our co-chairs, as always, to close us out. Y'all always go back and forth about who wants to speak first. So I'm not going to say anything. Whoever wants to speak first, speak.
I'll hop in and say, again, as always, I appreciate all of the contributions of everyone in the Strike Force, and excited about the ways that we're getting to shared perspective on our goal, which is half of the charge of this Strike Force. So we should feel good about that. Obviously, we have to get the details of it right, and so that we're comfortable, but agree that we've made a lot of progress there. Let's continue to kind of stick with our working groups and continue to make progress there. So any questions or feelings of unreadiness or desires to have something strengthened or clarified, that we seek to get that through those conversations so that we can make sure our recommendations really, as folks have said, align with the goals that we're setting for ourselves for 2030 and 2040. So thank you.
Thank you, Director Cozart, and for your comments. And you will always go first because you are, right? And so, but I want to just sort of thank Don for saying something that this is historic. And it is historic. But it's only historic if we push the envelope. Because if we just settle back into where we have been, we will continue to lose numbers of people from DC. So we got to really push the envelope. I know government don't like to be pushed, but we got to push government, and we got to push every other kind of program to actually be the kind of innovative solutions that we need in DC. And to be able to address, one of the things, yeah, we want high-end people, but also what about low-income folks? Don't they have a right to be able to live in their neighborhoods and purchase a home? We got to address that as well and make sure that we really don't just go for the low-hanging fruit, but we go for the difficult cases. And that's why I keep bringing up the issue around mortgage readiness. What is that? That has no meaning. It has meanings to bankers and lenders, but it really has no meaning. The fact is that what we do in terms of education of people how to use finances is you make them mortgage ready. And that means you're able to reach down into a deeper constituency and basically harness that constituency in terms of economic empowerment. So I want to thank you all for just trying to push the envelope, stretch it, make it happen. And we can make it happen together. But as I always say, you got to be faithful, and faithful means also that you reach towards what you cannot see yet. God bless.
All right. We're going to leave the door open until 5 o'clock today. We still have a working group meeting in 30 minutes, and we look forward to many of you being there. And please continue to send us your language. I said yesterday, if you have questions, send them to each other. But if you have some language and a recommendation and you write it the way you want it to sound, send that to us. So with that as my last comment, I want to thank everybody for a very productive meeting, and we are adjourned.